Could the U.S. defend an invasion on the homeland? This sounds pretty interesting. Let's go.
It's the early 1980s, and over the sky of the American heartland, Soviet and Cuban paratroopers begin to fall from the sky. In minutes, thousands of communist invaders have gained a foothold in the very heart of America. With World War III in full swing, it's up to a band of plucky teenagers to fight a guerrilla war against the godless commies. If you grew up in the 80s or just...
Well, I did grow up in the 80s. It's an okay movie, but let's step back a couple notches. If we had an invasion on the homeland, what other country do you know that has as many firearms as we do in the hands of private individuals? Now, if it's some old grandma, does it matter? Does Red Dawn matter? I'd argue that that is a real problem for an invasion. The amount of people we have that are skilled with these firearms and their ability to fight back. I think this is a little bit different than most countries, and Red Dawn being very unique kind of fringe idea where you've got some teenagers fighting.
Red Dawn, a film that portrays a Soviet invasion of the United States toward the end of the Cold War. If someone were to invade America, could the U.S. pull all its forces home and hold out against a foreign invader? Despite what fiction like Red Dawn would have you believe, the United States was never in any danger of an invasion by the Soviet Union, mostly because the Russian people were about as interested in invading the U.S.
Well, most of our forces aren't abroad, right? I would say, I don't know the exact stats on that, but I would say most of our forces are sitting here at any one point in time. Now, we've got Marines on ships that could come back quickly. Now, if you're talking about at foreign bases, I don't think it's as much of an issue as they lead on in this program.
The saddest fact of the Cold War just might be that despite all the preparations to defend from an invasion by both sides, neither NATO nor the Soviet bloc ever had a single war plan drawn up for an actual preemptive invasion of the other's territory.
Well, think about that for a second. There's never going to be a traditional land invasion during the 80s or 90s. It was nuclear, right? So nuclear strike, then the other country's troops would come in and clean the mess up. You had to see what happened after the nuclear strike to determine what type of invasion, what areas you want to secure first after the fallout of the nuclear strike. Let's put that in the right context.
And why the U.S. was never under any threat of an invasion is due to its unique place in the world geography. In order for an enemy to get to America, first it must cross two massive oceans, and this geographic fact makes the United States the single most secure nation on Earth. Even today, moving troops and equipment across the oceans is a massive undertaking in terms of both logistics and cost, and very few nations are even capable of attempting the feat.
Well, and that's a very good point. We have neighbors to the north and to the south, right? We obviously can't secure our southern border and keep track of it. So if you're a bad guy, it's pretty easy to invade from the south. What I can see, we can't control the southern border at all. Now the north, even a bigger border. So if you're going to invade, you're not going to come by a ship and drop people at Malibu Beach and have them run up the shores. You're going to have them come from the north or the south. Or just have, like one of the presidents said, can't remember who, have us decay from within by propaganda.
The need to take and hold major seaports is critical, as aside from a few token forces with a small number of fire support platforms, amphibious landings alone wouldn't be able to deliver firepower fast enough to secure a beachhead. In Normandy during World War II, the success of the landings was largely down to a brilliant deception played out by the Allies, which saw the Nazis concentrate their forces at the wrong landing site.
Well, Normandy was France, it wasn't Germany, right? So the Germans had taken French territory, and we trying to get that back. Take that aside. Very big coastlines, a lot of huge seaports on both sides of the ocean. Could it happen? Well, of course it could as we erode internally, whether it be our security at our seaports. But let's be practical for a second. I'm not saying the militias are a useful tool, even though I like militias. We have one hell of a well-armed civilian population that could create all sorts of havoc. Now, if you disarm them, it does change the calculus a little bit, but it's still something you have to take into consideration if we did get invaded from abroad.
Had Hitler allowed his commanders to commit panzer reinforcements to the landings, Normandy would have likely ended as a complete catastrophe for the Allies.
If you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button.
On the beachheads, Allied logistical units had already disembarked enough tanks to repel the assault. In an invasion of the U.S. homeland, such a ruse would be impossible to pull off. Long-range and satellite surveillance assets would see an invasion fleet days before it made landfall, and its target would be clearly known to the American defenders. Therefore, China and Russia would have to act quickly and decisively, taking major seaports and holding them long enough to disembark a sizable expeditionary force able to repel American counterassaults.
That large force they would need to land. Typically, you think you'd see that coming with ships, right? So you'd see significant amount of ships coming and have to take a seaport. When you get into the tech, I think you're comparing it to World War II, seems nearly impossible. With all the tech, AI, and everything, we don't have control of that. In other words, we can't see them coming. It does change this discussion quite a bit. If it's just comparing this to a World War II style scenario, okay. But adding in tech, and taking down tech, and what can come in because we can't see them, changes things up quite a bit.
For China, the only good options for unloading main battle tanks and mechanized artillery would be the ports in LA, Long Beach, Oakland, Tacoma, and Seattle. The LA Long Beach complex would be especially attractive as it's one of the world's largest ports and would allow Chinese forces to disembark very quickly. Unfortunately, these port facilities are also very close to several American air and naval bases, making them easily defended. The Seattle and Tacoma ports, however, are far more vulnerable, as only 5 major American bases are near these facilities. Landing in Washington, though, would mean Chinese forces would have to fight south and into California through easily defended and very mountainous terrain.
Yeah, if they went from Seattle or Tacoma, you're talking about having to go south, southeast to some pretty tough terrain, which would be relatively easy to take care of from an airstrike standpoint. America's a big country. You think about what Germany did in World War II. They were getting it from the Russians and from the Allies, both sides, because they're such a big country as well. Hard to attack a big country and secure things.
Nightmare for any Chinese commander. Russian invaders would face an even less enviable job. The American East Coast is home to far more numerous large port facilities, giving the Russian invasion force a greater number of targets to pick from. Unfortunately, the American East Coast is also the most heavily defended, with several dozen major military installations spread out from north to south. The East Coast is also home to America's largest military shipyards, which would be so heavily protected it would be suicidal to attempt a landing or assault against them. Russia's best bet would be to attempt a landing in Mobile, Alabama or Houston, Texas. This, however, would mean Russian forces would have to spend more time out at sea and move into the Gulf of Mexico, where they would be surrounded on all sides but the south by major American air bases. China and Russia could opt to coerce or bribe Mexico or Canada into allowing them to.
Well, as you've seen from the assortment of caravans that walk through the Mexican border from Guatemala and walk through the American border from Mexico, we have no ability to stop that. Now, Canada being even bigger, so if they landed in, say, Canada, and then came down from the north, why not? It's a lot of movement they have to get there. I mean, you're going to have to take a lot of troops from a seaport somewhere in Canada and then have them disperse all along the border and come down. That's a lot of ground to cover.
Land at their facilities and launch an invasion into the U.S. itself. This would be by far the best strategic option for the invasion forces, but in response to the agreement between either nation and the Sino-Russian alliance, the United States would immediately begin a large-scale bombing campaign against port facilities in Canada or Mexico, with every viable port being within easy reach of American bombers. Even before the invasion force crossed the ocean, they would be sailing for ports that have been turned into rubble. Assuming that the U.S. didn't use naval aviation, which it definitely would, the invaders could opt for using ports.
The U.S. has got the biggest naval aviation squadron in the world, even compared to China at this point. So we got a different set of facts with naval aviation. We're going to dominate that. Now, could you take it out? Sure. If you're China, why would you want to kill your biggest customer? I don't know. Anything's possible.
South America, well out of reach of most American bombers, and then simply move north to invade through Mexico. Moving through South America's poor rail and road infrastructure, though, would be a nightmare for the invaders, allowing plenty of time for the US to simply move blocking forces through Mexico to Panama and then hold off the invasion there. If, miraculously, though the alliance did manage to land forces in Canada or Mexico, it would face a different tactical nightmare altogether. In Canada, the lack of suitable border crossings would force the invaders to spread out over a large area, or bottleneck and be subjected to endless attacks by American air power. In Mexico, military border crossings would be possible over a far larger area, but enemy forces would be moving through terrain that provided absolutely no cover. American air power would once more devastate any invaders trying to move through the flat terrain of the US-Mexico border.
I definitely think we can be invaded if you cripple us from within, right? So if you're going to fight Mike Tyson, you give him food poisoning the night before, and you fight him the next day, you might stand a chance, right? There's always, if there's a will, there's a way. And if you cripple us internally, it takes a... And we're all focused internally, right? Sounds familiar? It's pretty easy to come from the external because all of our energy is spent internally. Now, saying that, how do you get all those troops here? I think now with tech, it's a lot different prospect than it was in the format he's comparing it to in the video.
Land would rely on naval power to get the job done. And right off the bat, no nation on Earth, nor any combination of nations, has the firepower and logistical support needed to... On the other side of the world, China struggles to turn itself into a first world power. And other than resentment towards Japan over its actions in World War II, China has had no real motivations to build a strong navy, at least until now.
As we all know, China is in the process of building a stronger navy, and also building places for their navy to stop, refuel, and get logistics squared away with these islands. Now, how do they get close enough to the United States for to go down this pattern of could the U.S. be invaded? How would they get the bodies here? Obviously, it's the ships. They've already got bases staged places. It's pretty easy to say, do an exercise at XYZ base somewhere off in the Atlantic down here, South America. A made-up island, right? Guess we could do that. Develop one. Have an exercise and stage a lot of troops there. You could see that, but you need a lot of bodies. If you first cripple the infrastructure, EMP attack, something like that, I could see the land not being as much of a problem because we've got a lot of whiners and complainers that would turn pretty quickly.
Much like the Soviet Union and Europe's NATO partners, though, China definitely had no real reason to build a heavy sea lift capability in order to move thousands of troops and heavy equipment across the ocean. On the other hand, the United States is both blessed and cursed by geography. While it's untouchable to invasion thanks to the Atlantic and the Pacific, it also means that in order to project power on the world stage, America has always needed a strong navy. This is the reason that the US has always had a very strong naval tradition, and why it has invested in naval and air transport more than any other nation on Earth. If US troops want to get somewhere, after all, they're certainly not walking there. To even get forces into the US,
I don't know if you remember, I think it was during the George Bush Jr. era. At one point, we were going to outsource or sell some of our big seaports to the Chinese or have them run them. I can't recall, but it was a pretty big deal. It did get shut down, but that was going to happen where they were going to control, I believe it was Long Beach and some other big seaports. They wanted to buy them. A lot of money being made. They were transportation costs and container costs. But if they did control those things, that'd be catastrophic.
The invading army is going to need some serious sea lift capability, and no force on Earth comes even close to the US's 125-vessel Military Sea Lift Command, which operates a vast fleet of oilers, tankers, and heavy cargo transports. China has in recent years expanded its landing ship capabilities, with several dozen available to carry troops and heavy equipment. These ships, though, are not meant for global operations and are only designed for cross-strait invasions into Taiwan or to ferry supplies to China's illegal holdings in the artificial islands it built.
You got to have bases to stop at for these ships, right? So you got to have some place to refuel, some place to get more supplies. That's where it's nice we do have bases around the globe. I guess China is working towards that to get places to get their logistics caught up as they travel around the globe. Because getting a whole battalion of men in a ship from one place to another without stopping, fuel, supplies, everything like that, it's going to be a real challenge.
Across the South China Sea. A crippling lack of support vessels such as oilers means that China cannot physically get its landing ships across the Pacific, though even if this problem were to be solved, the nation cannot hope to make a contested landing on foreign soil. Again, this is because of China's lack of need for a global expeditionary military force. China's chief military concerns lie with a military invasion and forced repatriation of Taiwan, and thus it has not invested money into developing a true blue water navy. Russia has even less naval transport capability and support vessels, which again is a result of its military objectives being close to home. To compound the two nations' sea lift problems, both nations have no dedicated amphibious assault ships capable of providing close air support and air superiority to landing forces on a contested beach. By comparison,
Every one of these countries is always working on it, in particular the Chinese, right? You see lots of information about them working on it. Now, with the advent of drone technology and how far it's come, EMP technology, just crippling infrastructure, as we've seen, having people stay home, create a lot of havoc. Put down the internet for a day. There's other ways to do it beyond just ferrying thousands of troops here. Control the infrastructure. That would be a far more effective invasion tactic.
the U.S. operates 9 of these specialized vehicles, and they will soon be equipped with the F-35 stealth fighter. Projecting air power is in fact the biggest weakness for any nation hoping to invade the U.S., and China and Russia combined only operate 2 active-duty aircraft carriers of extremely limited capabilities. Without adequate air power, neither nation could expect to secure a foothold on the U.S. mainland. America's air forces are twice as large as both nations combined, and its naval aviation alone is as large as Russia's total air power. If by some miracle either nation could get troops across the ocean to U.S. shores, the lack of air power would reduce the attempted landings to a suicide mission.
We do have significant air power here in the United States, whether it be on ships or at bases around the globe. We get into the tech of this, it creates it's a wild card. If you control the tech, you can control exponentially the amount of troop involvement by your enemy.
In the end, not only could the U.S. protect from an invasion of the homeland, but it is currently and for the foreseeable future completely invulnerable to military invasion. Luckily, the U.S., China.
What do you guys think about being invaded from abroad? Can't remember which president said it. May have been Abraham Lincoln, but the U.S. will fall from within, not from without. And that would be the best structure. Create chaos internally, division, and then it's easy to take over by whatever party sings the right tune.